My name is Eliza, and I just turned 28. On the morning of my birthday, my parents packed their van, kissed me on the cheek, and left town for a once-in-a-lifetime gig, leaving me completely alone. Hours later, while they were probably still on the road, they saw me on the evening news. They saw their quiet, dutiful librarian daughter being hailed as a tech prodigy, standing in the middle of a citywide disaster, having just secured a multi-million-dollar deal for an app I had built in secret for 5 years. They watched as I became everything they never thought I could be, without them. What they didn't know was that their abandonment on my birthday was the very thing that set it all in motion. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. And before I tell you how one stormy birthday changed my entire world, hit that like and subscribe button. You're not going to want to miss how this story ends. Growing up, I was what you'd call a responsible child. That's a polite word for a child who learns very early on that their needs come second. My parents, David and Susan, weren't bad people in the way you see in movies. They weren't cruel or abusive. They were just dreamers, and their dream was to be rock stars. Even now, in their late 50s, they still dress in vintage band t-shirts, lugging their guitars and amps to any open mic night that will have them. They live for the music, for the phantom promise of a record deal that's always just around the corner. It's a romantic notion, I suppose, unless you're the one paying the bills for it. I, on the other hand, was born with an old soul. I found my magic not on a stage, but in the hushed aisles of the public library. The scent of aging paper and binding glue was my perfume. The quiet rustle of turning pages was my symphony. I became a librarian, a path so predictable and stable that my parents saw it as a quaint failure. To them, a steady paycheck wasn't a sign of success. It was a sign of giving up. But that steady paycheck was the foundation upon which their dreams were built. From the moment I got my first part-time job at 16, I became the family's financial shock absorber. It started small. Liza, honey, can you spot us $50 for gas to get to the gig in the next town over? We'll pay you back. They never did. When I graduated high school with honors, a fact they barely registered, most of my graduation money went to fixing their van's transmission. "This van is our livelihood, sweetie," my dad, David, had said, slinging an arm around me. "You're investing in our future. Which is your future?" The pattern was set. I went to community college and then a state university, living at home to save money. The money I saved, however, never seemed to stay in my bank account. It was always siphoned off by one of their emergencies. My mother, Susan, was the master of the guilt-laced request. "I know you were saving for that new laptop," she'd say, her voice soft and sorrowful. "But the studio time is half price this week, and this could be our big break." How could I say no? Saying no felt like I was crushing their spirits. The most painful memory was my college graduation. It was a big deal for me. I was the first person in our immediate family to get a 4-year degree. I'd bought a new dress, I'd practiced walking in heels. 2 days before the ceremony, they got a call. A chance to open for a semi-famous 80 Seconds cover band at a casino 3 states away. It was on the same day as my graduation. I begged them to stay. "It's just a walk across a stage, Liza," my father had said, already packing his guitar case. "But this could be it." I sat alone at my graduation ceremony, surrounded by cheering families. I clutched my diploma and smiled for the photographers. But inside, a small, quiet part of me withered. I sent them a photo of me in my cap and gown. My mom texted back 3 hours later. "You look so smart, sweetie. The show was a hit. Wish you were here." It was as if she didn't even realize the irony. After I got my job as a senior librarian, my financial contributions became an expectation. I paid for the mortgage on our small, perpetually in need of repair house. I covered the groceries, the utilities, the van insurance. They contributed what they could from their sporadic gig earnings. But I was the bedrock. They saw me as the manager of our collective life, while they were the talent. My life was the boring, practical scaffolding that allowed their vibrant, artistic lives to flourish. They loved me, I think, but in the way one loves a reliable appliance. You don't think about it much until it stops working. I rarely dated. My social life consisted of a book club and a weekly dinner with my best friend, Clara. When I once mentioned I was thinking of getting my own apartment, my mother's eyes filled with tears. "But who would look after us?" she'd whispered, as if I were proposing to abandon two toddlers. The guilt was a cage I had helped build, and I didn't know how to find the key. I was 27, living in the basement room of my childhood home, funding a dream that wasn't mine, and feeling my own quiet aspirations fade into the background. But I had a secret, a dream of my own, tucked away in the late hours of the night, glowing on a screen in the silent dark. It was a secret I guarded fiercely, because I knew if they found out, they'd find a way to make that dream about them, too. I had thought, foolishly, that my 28th birthday might be different. I'd hinted for weeks that all I wanted was a quiet family dinner, maybe my favorite lasagna, a simple cake, a single evening where the focus wasn't on them. But I should have known better. I should have known that, in their world, the spotlight only had room for two. I had no idea that their next act of casual neglect would be the one to finally set me free. The week leading up to my birthday was, for once, quiet. There were no last-minute financial crises, no dramatic band arguments that required my mediation. I allowed a sliver of hope to take root. Maybe this year, they'd remember. Maybe this year, I would feel seen. I'd even taken the day off work, a rare luxury. The plan I'd mapped out in my head was simple. A slow morning reading a new book, maybe a walk in the park if the weather held, and then the promised family dinner. I was going to make my own cake a lemon and lavender confection I'd been wanting to try, so there would be no pressure on them. The morning of my birthday dawned gray and overcast, the sky threatening rain. I came upstairs from my basement room to the sound of unusual activity. Instead of the usual sleepy shuffle to the coffee pot, there was the clatter of gear being moved, the zip of duffel bags, the low murmur of excited, urgent voices. My heart sank. I knew that sound. It was the sound of a gig. I found them in the living room, surrounded by their equipment. My father was polishing his Fender guitar with a soft cloth, a focused, almost reverent look on his face. My mother was on the phone, her voice a pitch higher than usual. "Yes, we can be there by sound check at 5. No, it's no problem at all. We're pros." She hung up and beamed at me, her face glowing with an energy I hadn't seen in months. "Liza, you'll never guess what happened." "Happy birthday to me?" I asked, my voice flat. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "Oh, right. Happy birthday, sweetie. Listen to this. The Starlight Lounge in Rockport, you know, the really exclusive one? Their opening act just canceled. The manager remembered us from that showcase last year and called us first. This is a paid gig, Liza. A real one, with an industry scout in the audience." Rockport was a 4-hour drive away. "Today?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "The opportunity of a lifetime doesn't wait for birthdays, honey," my father said, not looking up from his guitar. "This is what we've been working for. This is the big one. I can feel it." I leaned against the doorframe, the weight of 1,000 similar disappointments settling on my shoulders. "So, no birthday dinner then." My mother rushed over and pulled me into a hug that felt more like a brief, distracting pat-down. "Oh, we'll celebrate when we get back, a belated birthday. It'll be even better because we'll be celebrating our success. Think of it, Liza, you won't have to worry about the mortgage anymore." It was her go-to line. The promise that their success would somehow be my reward for years of sacrifice. I didn't argue. What was the point? Arguing would only lead to them calling me unsupportive, selfish. It would mar their triumphant departure with the sour note of my own needs. So I just nodded, a hollow feeling spreading through my chest. I helped them load the last of their gear into the van. My mother pressed a crumpled $20 bill into my hand. "Here, sweetie, order yourself a pizza. Get the fancy kind." The gesture was so clueless, so utterly tone-deaf, that it was almost comical. A $20 bill, likely from the grocery money I'd given her yesterday, as a consolation prize for their absence on my birthday. I watched them pull out of the driveway, my father honking the horn in a cheerful 2-beat rhythm. The gray sky finally broke, and a light drizzle began to fall. I stood on the porch until their van disappeared around the corner. the $20 bill growing damp in my hand. I was 28 years old, and I was completely, utterly alone. The rain started to fall harder, and a distant roll of thunder echoed in the hills. The storm was coming. I just didn't realize it was coming for me. The first few hours of my solitary birthday were spent in a state of quiet resignation. I put their $20 in the emergency jar on the counter, a jar I funded, and they frequently raided, and decided to bake my lemon and lavender cake anyway. It felt like a small act of defiance. The house was eerily silent without the constant hum of their amps, or the sound of my dad practicing the same guitar riff over and over. The rain outside intensified, lashing against the windows in gusty sheets. The weather report on the radio had upgraded the storm from a simple squall to a severe weather event, warning of potential flash floods in low-lying areas. Our house, nestled at the bottom of a gentle hill, was one of those areas. I tried to push the worry aside. My real focus, my secret world, was waiting for me in the basement. For the past 5 years, after my library shift ended and my parents were either out at a gig or asleep, I would descend the creaky wooden stairs to my real passion. It wasn't music. It was code. I had taught myself programming through online courses and library books. And for 5 years, I had been meticulously building an application. I called it Storyweaver. It was a platform designed to connect people through anonymous, shared stories. Users could write about their experiences, their joys, their griefs, and the app's algorithm would connect them with others who had gone through similar things, creating threads of shared humanity. It was born from my own loneliness, a desire to create the connection I lacked in my own home. My setup was modest: a powerful desktop I'd built myself, and a small, climate-controlled server rack tucked into a dry corner. The basement had always been damp, a fact I'd mentioned to my father dozens of times. We had an old sump pump, but it was unreliable. "We need to get that looked at, Dad," I'd said just last month. He'd waved me off. "I'll get to it, Liza. It's on the list." It was always on the list. Around 3 p.m., the lights flickered and went out. The hum of the refrigerator died, and the house was plunged into a dim, gray silence, punctuated only by the drumming of the rain. A power outage. I fumbled for my phone, its flashlight cutting a beam through the gloom. I sent a quick text to my parents. "Power's out here. The storm is getting pretty bad." 15 minutes later, my mom replied, "Oh no, stay safe. The sun is shining here in Rockport. Getting ready for sound check. So exciting." XO. No questions. No. "Are you okay?" No. "Is the basement flooding?" Just a cheerful, self-absorbed update. A familiar bitterness rose in my throat. I pushed it down and made my way to the basement stairs. The air felt heavier, thicker, and I could hear a faint, ominous sound. Drip, drip, slosh. My beam of light revealed my worst fears. A dark puddle was spreading from the corner where the sump pump was located. It had failed. Water was seeping in through the old foundation, and the puddle was already an inch deep, creeping steadily towards my server rack. My life's work. 5 years of late nights, of secret hopes and dreams, were sitting just a few feet from a rising tide of muddy rainwater. Panic seized me. I called my dad. It went straight to voicemail. "His phone's probably off for sound check," I muttered, trying to stay calm. I called my mom. She answered on the 4th ring, her voice breathless and loud over the sound of music in the background. "Liza? Can't talk now, honey. We're about to go on. Is everything okay?" "No," I said, my voice shaking. "The power is out. The sump pump failed, and the basement is flooding. My computer, all my work. It's going to be ruined." There was a pause. I heard her say to someone, "It's just Liza. Something about the basement." Then, back to me. "Honey, what do you want us to do? We're 4 hours away. Just try to move your things to higher ground. We'll deal with it when we get back tomorrow. We have to go. Break a leg, David." The line went dead. I stared at my phone in disbelief. Move my things to higher ground. The server rack weighed over 100 pounds. The water was rising faster now. I felt a wave of helpless fury wash over me. They didn't care. They truly, fundamentally, did not care. my hands trembling. I called the one person I knew would understand. My friend, Clara. Eliza! Happy birthday! I was just about to call you. How's it going? The dam of my composure broke. I sobbed out the whole story, the gig, the $20 bill, the storm, the flooding basement, the phone call with my mom. Clara listened patiently. Her silence, a comforting presence on the other end of the line. When I finished, her voice was quiet but firm. Eliza, this has to stop. They didn't just forget your birthday. They abandoned you in an emergency. They left their adult daughter, the one who pays their mortgage, to deal with a flooding house alone so they could play act as rock stars. This isn't just selfish anymore. This is dangerous. Hearing her say it, hearing my chaotic feelings articulated so clearly, was like a splash of cold water. She was right. It was dangerous. My whole life with them had been a slow-motion emergency, and I had been the only first responder. What do I do, Clara? I whispered. Right now? You save your work. Call the emergency line for the fire department. See if they can help with the pumping. Then, you call a 24-hour plumber. It'll be expensive, but you can't do this alone. As for your parents, we'll figure that out later. But this is a wake-up call, E. This is your house screaming at you to save yourself. Oh, hanging up the phone, I felt a new kind of energy surge through me. The panic was still there, but it was now overlaid with a cold, hard resolve. Clara was right. It was time to save myself. I had spent my entire life keeping my parents' dream afloat. Now it was time to save my own. But as I looked at the encroaching water, I realized I was in a race against time, and I had no idea if it was a race I could win. Following Clara's advice, I waded into the rising water. It was cold and smelled of damp earth and decay. Every instinct screamed at me to get out, but the image of 5 years of my life being short-circuited into oblivion was a more potent fear. My servers, my app, Storyweaver was more than just code. It was the repository of my soul. It was the only thing that was truly mine. The fire department's non-emergency line was swamped. The entire county was dealing with outages and flooding. They took my name but couldn't promise when, or if, they could send a truck. The 24-hour plumbers I called gave me similar responses. One quoted me an exorbitant emergency fee and said the earliest he could get there was morning. Morning would be too late. The water was already lapping at the base of the metal shelving unit holding the servers. Desperation is a powerful motivator. I found a stack of old cinder blocks my dad had been meaning to use for a garden wall for the past decade. One by one, I hauled them through the water, my muscles screaming in protest, my jeans soaked to the thigh. I wedged them under the legs of the server rack, raising it a precious 6 inches. It was a temporary solution, a flimsy barricade against the inevitable. As I worked, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my dad. Hey, sweetie. Mom told me about the basement. Bummer. Hope you get it sorted. The show was incredible. The scout was here. We think he was impressed. Heading to the after party now. Don't wait up. A bummer. He called the potential destruction of my most important possession in a house I paid for a bummer. I stared at the message, the casual, dismissive words glowing in the dark. The water sloshed around my ankles. I was cold. I was exhausted, and I was holding back tears of sheer rage. This wasn't just neglect. It was a profound, soul-crushing invalidation of my entire existence. My crisis was a bummer, an inconvenient footnote to their glorious night. That was the moment something inside me shifted. It wasn't a loud snap, but a quiet, definitive click, like a lock falling into place. The cage of guilt I had lived in for so long suddenly felt flimsy. The bars weren't made of steel. They were made of my own misplaced sense of duty. And I was done. I was done being the responsible one. I was done setting myself on fire to keep them warm. I went back upstairs, dripping water onto the worn linoleum of the kitchen floor. I looked around the house that had never truly felt like mine. It was a museum of their deferred dreams and my fulfilled obligations. His guitars were mounted on the wall like sacred artifacts. Her collection of band posters from the 72nds covered the hallway. My own presence was confined to the basement and the bills paid in my name. My mind, usually a whirl of anxiety and worry, became preternaturally calm. The path forward was suddenly, terrifyingly clear. I wasn't just going to save my work, I was going to save myself. They thought my life was a bummer? I was about to show them what I was capable of when I finally stopped managing theirs. The water was still rising. I knew my cinder block solution wouldn't last the night. I had one last, desperate idea. There was a local tech startup incubator downtown, Innovate Hub, in a renovated warehouse on higher ground. I knew the founder, a woman named Maria, from a library outreach program. It was a long shot, but it was the only one I had. I found her number and dialed, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I had to get my servers out of there, not just to save my app, but as a symbolic act. I was physically removing my dream from the toxic, flooded foundation of their world. This wasn't just about a birthday anymore. This was about the rest of my life. Maria answered on the second ring, her voice calm and steady despite the storm raging outside. "Eliza? Is everything all right? The storm's a bad one." In a rush of words, I explained everything. The flood, the servers, the 5 years of secret work. I didn't mention my parents. It felt like a petty distraction from the real crisis. I just explained that my life's work was hours, maybe minutes, from being destroyed, and I needed a safe, dry place with power. "The generator at the hub kicked on an hour ago," she said without hesitation. "We have empty server space. Can you get it here?" "I don't know how," I admitted, the first flicker of despair returning. "The rack is too heavy for me to move alone, and my car is a small sedan." "Stay put," Maria said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "I know a guy. He runs a 24/7 catering business, has a refrigerated van. He owes me a favor. I'm sending him your address. His name is Mark. He'll be there in 20 minutes. I was stunned by her immediate, unconditional help. After a lifetime of having my needs dismissed, this simple act of competence and compassion felt like a miracle. True to her word, 20 minutes later, a large white van pulled into my driveway, its headlights cutting through the torrential rain. A man in a rain slicker Mark hopped out. He was tall, with a kind face and an air of weary capability. "Maria sent me," he said, shouting over the wind. "Got some heavy lifting to do?" Together, we wrestled the server rack out of the water, disconnected the tangled mess of cables, and carefully maneuvered it up the narrow basement stairs. Mark was a godsend. Strong and efficient, never once complaining about the water or the difficulty of the task. As we were loading the last piece of equipment into his van, he paused. "Sorry, I'm a journalist on the side," he said, gesturing to my servers. "I have to ask, what is all this? What's so important it needed a rescue mission in the middle of a hurricane?" And for the first time, I said it out loud to a stranger. "It's an app I built. It's called Storyweaver." I gave him the short pitch, explaining its purpose. His eyes, which had been merely curious, lit up with genuine interest. "That's brilliant," he said slowly. "Like a support group for the entire human race." We drove through the flooded streets to Innovate Hub. It was a beacon of light and activity in the darkened city. Inside, a handful of other tech entrepreneurs were camped out, working by the light of their laptops. Maria greeted me with a warm hug and a dry towel. With her help and Mark's, we got Storyweaver hooked up to their system. As the server fans whirred to life, and the status lights blinked from red to a steady, healthy green, I felt tears of relief stream down my face. It was safe. My dream was safe. Mark stayed, asking more questions about the app. He was fascinated by the algorithm I'd written, the one that analyzed narrative structure and emotional sentiment to create connections. "This isn't just a social media app, Eliza. This is a mental health tool. This is a community builder. Have you thought about a launch strategy, funding?" "I haven't gotten that far," I confessed. "For years, it's just been my secret." "Oh, secrets like this have a way of getting out," he said, a smile playing on his lips. "I write a tech column for the city paper, but I also have connections at the National News Syndicate. This story, the app, the mission, the storm rescue, it's incredible. Would you be willing to do an interview? Right here, right now? An interview? For the news?" My quiet, invisible life was suddenly on the verge of becoming very, very public. The old me would have recoiled in fear, terrified of the attention. But looking at my servers, humming safely in their new home, I felt a surge of confidence. My parents had left me to sink. These strangers had thrown me a lifeline. My old life was already being washed away by the floodwaters. What did I have to lose? Yes, I said, my voice clear and steady. I'm ready to tell my story. For the next hour, I sat with Mark as he recorded an interview. I told him everything about Storyweaver, its inception, its purpose, its 5-year journey from an idea to a fully functional platform. I spoke about the power of shared stories to heal and connect. At the end, he asked, "What prompted you to make this desperate move tonight?" I paused, then gave a carefully edited version of the truth. "Tonight was my 28th birthday," I said. "A storm and a flood made me realize that you can't wait for the perfect time to save the things you love. You just have to do it." Mark packed up his equipment, his excitement palpable. "This is going to be big, Eliza. I'm fast-tracking it. With the storm coverage, the networks are looking for human interest stories. This could be on the evening news. Tonight." The evening news. The thought sent a jolt through me. My parents. They would be at their after-party, probably gathered around a TV in the hotel bar, celebrating their big break. And they might see me. The plan wasn't to get revenge. The plan was simply to survive. But as I sat there, warm and dry in a building full of innovators, I realized that the best revenge wasn't screaming or crying. It was succeeding. It was building a new world for myself on higher ground, while they were still playing in a flooded basement of their own making. The drive home from Rockport must have been a triumphant one for them. I can picture it perfectly, a scene from a movie they'd always imagined starring in. My father, David, would have been gripping the steering wheel, a satisfied smirk on his face, replaying every chord and every cheer from their small but, in his mind, adoring audience. He'd dissect the crowd, pointing out the silent, note-taking man in the back. The mythical industry scout convinced that the phone call that would change their lives was imminent. My mother, Susan, would have been his hype woman, scrolling through blurry photos, her mind already composing the triumphant social media post. "The industry is buzzing about Static Bloom," she would write. They would have been floating on a cloud of self-congratulation and cheap beer. The bummer of my flooded basement, a distant, insignificant memory, an inconvenience already forgotten. They likely arrived home late the next afternoon, physically exhausted but spiritually soaring. The first sign of trouble would have been the state of the neighborhood, the water line on the garage door, the muddy lawn, the debris left by the storm's fury. They would have walked inside, their boots tracking mud on the floor, expecting to be greeted by the familiar scent of bleach and the sight of me, their dutiful daughter, on my hands and knees, mopping up the mess. They would have expected a tale of woe, a long list of damages, and an implicit plea for their guidance and help. Instead, they found an unnerving silence, a house that was clean, dry, and empty. And my note. I had left it on the kitchen counter, a single white sheet of paper held down by the salt shaker. It was simple, clinical, and devoid of the emotion they expected. "Basement is fine. My equipment is safe. I've gone out. We need to talk when you're ready." My phone, resting on the table in front of me at a quiet coffee shop, started vibrating almost immediately. It was my mother. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, a text. "Mom, Liza, where are you? We're home. The basement looks empty. All your computer stuff is gone. What happened?" Then my father. "Dad, what does this note mean? This isn't funny. Call us back. We're worried." Worried? The word was so foreign in this context, it felt like a typo. They weren't worried, they were confused. Their reliable appliance had removed itself from the wall. I was sitting across from Clara, my hands wrapped around a warm latte, a signed preliminary contract from a major tech investor tucked securely in my bag. Mark's story hadn't just made the local evening news. The wire service had pushed it to national affiliates. The narrative of the librarian coder who rescued her revolutionary app from a hurricane was too good to pass up. By morning, my personal email, an account they didn't even know existed, was overflowing. Venture capitalists, tech journalists, CEOs of established firms. Mark, a man I'd known for less than 48 hours, had already connected me with an intellectual property lawyer and a financial advisor who spoke to me not as a child, but as a founder. I waited until evening to call them back, giving them hours to stew in their own confusion. My mother answered on the first ring, her voice a frantic, brittle mix of anxiety and accusation. "Eliza Jane, what in the world is going on? Your father and we saw you. On the television. Some ridiculous story about an app. And a multi-million-dollar deal. What did you do?" The question was a window into her soul. What did I do? In her mind, my success couldn't possibly be the result of my own quiet, diligent work. It had to be a trick, a lottery ticket, some bizarre stroke of luck I'd stumbled upon. It couldn't be earned. "It's not nonsense, Mom. It's my job. It's what I've been working on every night for the past 5 years while you were at band practice," I said, my voice unnervingly calm. "I'm staying at a hotel downtown. I have some business to finish, but I'll be home tomorrow morning at 10. I think it's time we talked. All of us." The confrontation took place in their sanctuary, the living room, the same room where they had announced their glorious departure just 2 days earlier. They were sitting on the worn floral couch, a united front of simmering resentment and suspicion. They looked like they had rehearsed their opening statement. I chose the sturdy armchair opposite them, the one no one ever sat in, and placed my sleek new laptop on the coffee table between us. I felt a strange, cold sense of detachment. The power dynamic, the invisible architecture of our family, had been razed to the ground. I was no longer the tenant asking for an extension. I was the architect of a new reality. "So," my father began, leaning forward, trying to reclaim his patriarchal authority, "you want to explain this little stunt? The disappearing act, the secret app, the television performance? What's this all about, Eliza?" "It's about my life," I said simply. "The one I've been living in the margins of yours." I didn't shout. I didn't cry. My voice was even and measured, the voice of a librarian presenting a meticulously researched report. I laid out the facts of the last 5 years, the late nights, the online courses, the financial and emotional cost of nurturing a dream in secret, because I knew that if it were brought into the light of their world, they would either dismiss it as a silly hobby or try to co-opt it as their own. Then I walked them, moment by painful moment, through the events of my birthday. At 3 p.m., while you were getting ready for sound check, I was standing in a foot of freezing water in the basement. I began, my gaze locked on theirs. At 3:30, while you were posing for a selfie backstage, I was hauling cinder blocks one by one to save my life's work from being destroyed. At 4:15, when I finally reached you, Mom, my voice shaking with panic, you told me to deal with it and hung up the phone to go watch Dad play. "And you," I said, turning to my father, who was now staring at his hands, "you sent me a text message calling my home, my safety, and my entire career's work a bummer before you went to an after-party." My mother had the grace to look ashamed, her eyes filling with tears of self-pity. My father, however, just looked angry, the rage of a cornered animal. "We didn't know it was that serious," he blustered, his voice rising. "You're always so dramatic about everything. How are we supposed to know this little computer hobby of yours was suddenly worth millions of dollars? You weren't supposed to know about the money," I said, my voice dropping, forcing them to lean in. "That's the entire point you keep missing. You were just supposed to care. You were supposed to care that your daughter was alone, in a house you live in, during a dangerous storm. The money doesn't change what you did or who you are. It just throws a very bright, very public spotlight on it." My mother started to sob, reaching for the familiar script. "We're so proud of you, honey. We really are. We had no idea. We can make it up to you. You can have a real birthday party now, a huge one. We can use some of that money to—" "Stop," I said. The single word was not loud, but it had the force of a physical blow. It cut through her performance and hung in the air between us. "This is the conversation we need to have. The money, my app, my success. They are mine. This is not a family lottery ticket. It is not the seed money for Static Bloom's comeback tour. It is the result of my work. Work I did in spite of your profound neglect, not because of your support. I opened my laptop and turned the screen towards them. A detailed spreadsheet filled the display. I took the liberty of doing some math. Over the past 10 years, factoring in my direct contributions to the mortgage, all utilities, groceries, van repairs, and the endless unrepaid loans for studio time and gear, I have given you both approximately $153,800. They stared at the number, their mouths slightly agape. It was an undeniable, calculated fact, a decade of their dependency laid bare. I am not asking for it back, I continued, a faint, bitter smile touching my lips. Consider it a severance package. As of today, I am moving out. A realtor will be contacting you next week to arrange for the sale of the house. The equity will be split according to legal ownership, which gives you a share. But my financial support in any form ends today. The Bank of Eliza, I declared, looking each of them directly in the eye, is permanently closed. My father shot to his feet, his face a mottled, furious red. After everything we've done for you? Given you a roof over your head? This is the thanks we get? I paid for this roof, I retorted, my own voice finally rising, filled with the righteous anger of 1,000 slights. I paid for the food on your plates and the gas in your van that took you away from me on my birthday. What you gave me was a place to sleep while I underwrote your fantasy. The transaction is over. They were stunned into absolute silence. They had walked into this room expecting to berate and reclaim their meek librarian daughter. They had not expected to be confronted by a CEO who had come with receipts, a lawyer, and an eviction notice. For the first time in my entire life, I was the one holding all the cards. I was the one setting the terms. I was the one ending the conversation. I was the one walking away. And I knew, with a certainty that was both terrifying and exhilarating, that I was never coming back. The hours following the confrontation were shrouded in a silence so thick and heavy it felt like a physical presence in the house. My parents retreated into their bedroom. The muffled sounds of their shocked, angry whispers, the only evidence of life. The usual soundtrack of my existence, the arguments, the pleas, the forced cheerfulness was gone. In its place was the deafening quiet of a world irrevocably fractured. They knew they had lost. The cold, hard numbers on the spreadsheet, combined with the unshakable resolve in my voice, had left no room for their usual arsenal of guilt, manipulation, and theatrical sorrow. I went down to the basement one last time. The water had fully receded, leaving behind a damp, musty smell and a thin, greasy layer of silt on the concrete floor. It was a ruin, a testament to years of neglect. But it was no longer my ruin to fix. I walked through the space that had been both my prison and my sanctuary, and packed a single, small suitcase. I took my essential clothes, my personal laptop, and a handful of mementos that felt truly mine. A worn copy of my favorite novel, a small, framed photo of a smiling 6-year-old me sitting on my grandfather's lap, and the first library card I was ever issued. Everything else, the books I'd collected, the furniture I'd bought, the life I had built in the shadows felt like the property of a ghost, a person I no longer was. I was shedding my old skin. Clara arrived an hour later, her car, a getaway vehicle, in the driveway. She met me on the porch, pulling me into a hug that was fierce and protective. "How are you?" "Really?" she whispered, her eyes scanning my face for cracks. "I'm free," I said, and the word felt both enormous and terrifyingly simple. "It's done." I didn't look back as we drove away. I didn't watch the house shrink in the rearview mirror. I focused on the road ahead. That night, I checked into a sleek corporate apartment in a high-rise downtown, a temporary home paid for by the initial advance from my investor. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city lights, a glittering tapestry of possibility. The contrast with my dark, damp basement room was so stark it made me laugh out loud. My days immediately became a whirlwind of productive chaos. Meetings with lawyers who treated me with deference, accountants who mapped out my financial future with crisp efficiency, and a small, brilliant team of developers I'd hired to help me scale Storyweaver for its official launch. I worked 18-hour days, fueled by coffee and a sense of purpose so powerful it was like a physical force. It was a joyful, energizing exhaustion. Every decision was mine. Every success, and every potential failure, rested squarely on my shoulders. It was the most alive I had ever felt. The house sold with astonishing speed. As I'd suspected, the location was desirable, and a young family bought it within 2 weeks. After the mortgage was paid off and all fees were settled, I had the title company wire my parents their legal share of the equity. It was a substantial sum, enough to give them a comfortable cushion for a year or two, if they were wise. I included a brief, formal note with the wire transfer confirmation I emailed them. This concludes our shared financial obligations. I wish you both the best in your future endeavors. I heard through my Aunt Susan, my mother's sister, that they were not wise. They didn't see the money as a lifeline to build a stable future. They saw it as their first real taste of the rock star lifestyle they felt they'd been unjustly denied. They made a down payment on a flashy, oversized tour van with a custom paint job featuring their band's logo. They bought a set of expensive, vintage guitars. They told everyone who would listen that this was just the beginning, that their silent partnership in my success had finally paid off, allowing them to pursue their art without compromise. Some people, the ones who didn't know any better, believed them. The people who mattered knew the truth. Meanwhile, my own new dawn was breaking. I signed a long-term lease on a bright, airy office space for Storyweaver Incorporated, filling it with green plants, comfortable collaboration spaces, and a state-of-the-art coffee machine that became the heart of our company culture. I hired my first 5 employees, each one sharper and more dedicated than the last. My first major act as CEO wasn't to buy myself something extravagant, but to write a significant check to the city's emergency shelter, the one that had been overwhelmed during the storm. Then I partnered with my old library to create and fund a series of free coding workshops for underprivileged teenagers, with a special focus on encouraging young girls to enter the tech field. I wanted to build the ladder I'd never had. My parents' attempts to re-establish contact were clumsy and transparent. My mother sent long, rambling emails filled with tearful apologies that seamlessly morphed into passive-aggressive complaints about how hard it was to find a good mechanic for the new van. My father left a single, gruff voicemail. "So, I hear the app is really taking off. Guess your old man's creative genes finally kicked in, huh? Give me a call when you have a minute to talk business. Got some ideas for you." I deleted the message. The business I was building had no room for their brand of creativity. I was no longer the manager of their chaotic lives. I was the architect of my own. For the first time, the air I was breathing felt clean and clear, and it was full of the promise of everything that was yet to come. The storm had passed, and I had not only survived, I had learned how to build a world of my own on much, much higher ground. 18 months after I walked out of that house with a single suitcase and an uncertain future, I stood on a brightly lit stage in San Francisco, the weight of a heavy glass award in my hands. It was the Tech Innovator of the Year award from the industry's most prestigious organization. The ballroom was filled with the Silicon Valley elite, the visionaries and billionaires who were shaping the future. And for one night, they were all looking at me. Storyweaver had launched a year prior, and its growth had been meteoric, far exceeding even my wildest projections. It had become a cultural phenomenon, a quiet revolution in a noisy digital world. Millions of users from over 100 countries were sharing their stories, finding solace and connection in the anonymous threads of shared human experience. We had been featured in every major publication, from tech journals to mental health magazines. Psychologists and sociologists were publishing papers on the Storyweaver effect, praising its profound impact on combating loneliness and fostering empathy. The company was now valued at a figure that still seemed like a typo. And I had a team of 50 brilliant, passionate employees who I considered my real family. In my acceptance speech, I talked about the power of narrative. I spoke about how our personal stories, the ones we often hide in the basements of our hearts, are our greatest source of strength. The loneliest moments in our lives are often the seeds of our most important creations, I said, my voice steady as it echoed through the vast hall. I looked out at the sea of faces, and in the front row I saw Clara, Mark, and my lead developer, Sarah, all beaming with pride. This award isn't just for me, I concluded, my voice thick with emotion. It's for anyone who has ever felt that their story didn't matter, that their voice was too quiet to be heard. I am here tonight to tell you that it does. Find your voice, protect your story, and don't ever, ever let anyone else write your ending. As I walked off stage to a standing ovation, my phone, which I'd given to Clara to hold, buzzed with a notification. It was a Google alert for Static Bloom. I had set it up months ago, a morbid, lingering curiosity I couldn't quite shake. The headline was from a small, local blog in a town I'd never heard of in rural Ohio. Aging rockers Static Bloom played an empty bar. Blame lack of vision in today's youth. The article was brutally, painfully honest. It described a sparsely attended Tuesday night gig where my parents had played their usual set of 70 seconds inspired rock to a handful of indifferent patrons. The writer detailed how, after their final song was met with silence, my father had launched into a rambling, bitter tirade, blaming the soulless, auto-tuned industry and the apathetic youth for their failure to appreciate real art. The accompanying photo was a masterpiece of pathos. My parents on a dimly lit stage, looking tired, out of place, and faintly ridiculous under a flickering neon beer sign. Their new van and custom guitars were long gone. My Aunt Susan filled in the devastating details a few days later during one of our weekly calls. The money from the house sale had evaporated in less than a year. The flashy van was repossessed after they missed 3 payments. The expensive vintage guitars were sold to a pawn shop to pay rent on a small, run-down apartment in a town with no music scene. The life-changing gig in Rockport had led to nothing. The mythical scout had never called. Their moment, which had been an illusion all along, was over. They were back where they started, only now they were 18 months older, significantly more bitter, and without their financial safety net, me. Reality had finally forced them to get real jobs. My father was working at a hardware store. A man who had always seen himself as a poet now stocking shelves with nuts and bolts, his long hair tied back in a sad ponytail. My mother was a receptionist at a dental office. Her dreams of adoring fans replaced by the mundane reality of scheduling root canals and dealing with insurance companies. According to my aunt, they were profoundly miserable. They blamed everyone and everything but themselves. They had even started couples counseling, not to heal their fractured relationship, but because my mother hoped a therapist could somehow fix my father's festering anger and convince him to be more optimistic. About a month before the awards ceremony, my mother had made the call I had been dreading and preparing for. She was sobbing, her voice a thin, desperate wail. My father had been laid off from the hardware store for a bad attitude. They couldn't make their rent, due in 3 days. The old Eliza would have crumbled, her guilt and sense of duty overwhelming her. A wire transfer would have been sent within the hour, perpetuating the cycle. The new Eliza was different. "I'm sorry to hear that, Mom," I said, my voice infused with a calm kindness that was both genuine and practiced. "That must be incredibly difficult for you both." I let her speak for 10 minutes, a torrent of complaints, fears, and accusations. Then, when the inevitable direct plea for money came, I gave her my answer. "Mom, I can't send you money. I won't do that to you, or to me. It wouldn't help you in the long run. But I have already spoken to a highly recommended financial counselor in your town. I have arranged and paid for a 6-month program for both of you. He will help you budget, find sustainable work, manage your debt, and plan for the future. He's expecting your call. The rest is up to you." She had been furious, of course. She'd called me heartless, cold, and ungrateful. She'd screamed that I had changed. And I had calmly replied, "Yes, Mom, I have. Thank you for noticing." A week later, my aunt confirmed they had made an appointment. It was a start. The justice served wasn't a dramatic, cinematic revenge. It was the quiet, grinding, inevitable justice of consequences. They were finally being forced to take responsibility for their own lives, a role they had outsourced to their daughter for nearly 3 decades. My own life was rich and full. My relationship with Mark had blossomed into a beautiful, supportive partnership. He celebrated my successes without a hint of jealousy and held my hand through the stressful moments of running a company. He loved me for my mind and my quiet strength, not for what I could do for him. He was my partner, not my project. One evening, Mark and I were walking through the park. He asked if I ever felt guilty about my parents. I thought about it for a long moment. I used to, I said honestly. But I've realized something. By stepping away, I gave them the only real chance they ever had to grow up. The storm. It flooded a basement. But it also irrigated a desert I didn't even know I was living in. It allowed something new to grow. I had finally found my own stage, my own voice, and my own spotlight. And it was brighter and warmer than anything I had ever imagined. It's a strange and powerful thing to look back and see the exact moment your life fractured into a before and an after. For me, that line was drawn in the muddy water of a flooded basement on my 28th birthday. Before that day, my identity was a carefully constructed collage of other people's needs. I was a daughter, a caretaker, a financial shock absorber, a silent partner in a dream that was not my own. My sense of self was defined by my utility, by my ability to be responsible, to be the calm center in their self-created storm. My own dreams were whispers, thoughts I only allowed myself to have in the dead of night, so they wouldn't disturb anyone else's reality. I lived in a constant state of low-grade anxiety, a hum of worry beneath the surface of my quiet life. The fear of disappointing them was a cage I had willingly stepped into, believing that was the price of admission for their love. I truly believed that love was a form of selfless, endless service, and that my worth was directly proportional to how much of myself I was willing to give away. The storm that hit my town was nothing compared to the storm that had been brewing in my life for years. The flood didn't just threaten my work, it washed away the very foundations of the illusions I had been living with. As the cold water rose around my ankles, it brought a chilling clarity. It showed me that the family structure I had worked so hard to support was as unstable and porous as the foundation of that old house. It proved, in the most dramatic way possible, that when the real storms of life hit, I was completely and utterly on my own. My parents weren't my safety net. They were the hole I kept diligently patching, never realizing I was patching it from the inside. Their love wasn't unconditional. It was a transactional relationship where my role was to provide the stability that allowed them the freedom to be unstable. It was conditional on my ability to support their dreams, to stay small, to remain in my designated box as the reliable, invisible appliance humming quietly in the corner of their chaotic lives. Making the decision to walk away was the single most terrifying thing I have ever done. The guilt in the immediate aftermath was a physical force, a phantom limb that ached with a sense of lost connection and perceived failure. It is a feeling so many of us, especially women, are conditioned to feel. We are raised to be the peacemakers, the caregivers, the emotional glue that holds the family together. Even when the pieces are sharp and cutting us, we are taught that setting a boundary is an act of aggression, that choosing our own mental and emotional well-being is the height of selfishness. But what I learned in the painful, beautiful, and transformative months that followed is that the most profound act of love you can ever perform is to love yourself enough to demand to be treated with respect. A boundary isn't a wall you build to keep people out. It's a garden gate. You get to decide who enters, who gets to enjoy the beautiful world you've cultivated inside, and who needs to stay on the path. It's a quiet but powerful declaration that says, I love you, but I love me too, and I will no longer set myself on fire to keep you warm. The success of Storyweaver wasn't a miracle, and it wasn't just about mastering a programming language. It was the direct result of a lifetime of feeling invisible, of being an observer on the sidelines of my own life. It was born from a deep, desperate need to create the connection I craved. I had to build a platform for millions of strangers to feel seen and heard before I could finally find the courage to demand the same for myself. The greatest irony of my journey is that by creating a global space for anonymous connection, I finally learned how to truly connect with myself. I've learned that the word family is a verb, not just a noun. It's not about the blood you share, it's about the people who actively choose to show up for you, especially when it's difficult and inconvenient. It's the friend who answers your sobbing call in the middle of a storm. It's the stranger who helps you carry your dreams through floodwaters without asking for anything in return. It's the team that sees your vision and dedicates their own brilliance to helping you build it. Family is a choice you make every single day, a choice to surround yourself with people who celebrate your light instead of complaining that it's casting a shadow on them. My relationship with my parents is still a work in progress, and perhaps it always will be. I've come to accept the painful truth that I cannot change them. I can only change my response to them, and in doing so, change the entire dynamic of our relationship. By offering them the tools for self-sufficiency, the financial counselor, instead of a quick fix check, I gave them something far more valuable and terrifying than money: the opportunity and the responsibility to take care of themselves. Whether they fully embrace that opportunity is their story to write, not mine. My exhausted tenure as the protagonist in their drama is over. The most valuable lesson in all of this is something I wish I could go back and tell that quiet girl in the basement. Your worth is not, and has never been, negotiable. It is not determined by your parents, your partners, or your productivity. It is inherent and absolute. You deserve to take up space in this world. Your dreams deserve to see the light of day, not just the pale glow of a basement computer screen. And you are never, ever obligated to remain in a story where you are consistently treated like a secondary character. You are the author, the editor, and the hero of your own life. You have the power to start a new chapter whenever you choose. Sometimes, you just need a perfect storm to show you that the old house was never meant to be your forever home. So, I want to ask all of you watching, have you ever had to make a difficult choice to put your own well-being first, especially with family? What was that Jort Nook Tranley moment for you, the one that made you realize you had to draw a line in the sand? Please, share your stories in the comments below. Your story might just be the lifeline that someone else needs to read today, the one that gives them the courage to start their own new chapter. If this story resonated with you, please give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss more real-life stories about overcoming challenges and finding your own strength. Please share this video with someone who might need to hear that they are the main character in their own life. Thank you for listening. And remember, it is never, ever too late to start building on higher ground.